And I don't know what's happening, Dale. Everything, I've lost all the faces. I guess I don't worry about that.
You see the
Yeah,
PowerPoint?
you're good. You're good. They just put up a photograph of your book.
Oh, now I see it. Okay, cool. Okay.
Right.
So I want to start off. I want to talk about, you know, writing for children. So I started off publishing for adults, and then when I started working for Major League Baseball and developed a program for children, I realized that children were my audience, as I should have known. And so I kind of moved from the idea of being an adult writer into writing for children. And I've published, about 11 children's books and a couple of adult books. And I clearly have found my market with kids in grades 4 through maybe 3 through 9. So when it came to my latest book, this was something I had struggled with, how I was going to tell this story for a number of years. I wanted to write about the Children's March, and I wanted to write about 1963, because both the Children's March and what happened in Birmingham, and me turning 13 that year, and then how my family evolved around the civil rights movement on this one, within that 10-month period, was something that was very dear to me, and I wanted to figure a way to share those stories. So I actually wanted to tell the story of the Children's March through the perspective of the court scenes. And we contacted people in Birmingham and found the court records had never been released. So I was going to kind of do it from that perspective and then look back. And then I thought of it from a couple of different perspectives until my editor read a memoir I had written previously, an adult memoir, and he felt that was the voice that the book needed to be told through. And so he really convinced me to tell it through a memoir. So once we came to how I was going to tell it, I'd been doing research for a couple of years before that. But once we decided on how to tell it, I began the process. And research is very important to me. I love research, and I do it on multiple levels, and that was certainly true of this book. And then once I've done all of the research, I create these massive charts that have timelines, and so that I put them up on my visual when I'm writing. And this was so interesting because you had to go from Stamford, Connecticut to Birmingham to March on Washington, so I had to put all what's happening to me as a 13-year-old, and all that has to come into play. So it was kind of a fascinating research period. Turned in my proposal with a couple of chapters and heard back, sort of shortly afterwards. I think it was October. And when my editor called me and said, yes, Scholastic gave you the green light, and they want the book by December. So I, at that point, had written literally 3 chapters. And I said, is that December of this year or December of next year? So he said, no, it's of this year. So this is 2000 and, so let's see, 2000 came out in 2019, so 2018. So I literally had to go into, fast pace with the actual writing, and it was only possible because I had done so much research before I got to that point. And I really had mapped out. I don't do outlines for the actual book. I do a story arc, and I do, again, on a large sheet of paper, and with marking off my beginning, middle, and end, and kind of the key points I want to hit in between. But when I started this process, I honestly did not know of all the intersections between my own life and what was happening with my dad and what was happening with my family, and there's things I didn't realize all happened in that time period. So it was fascinating. It was a fascinating book for me to write and to begin to see how it pieced together, and it helped me understand why 1963 had always been this remarkable year in my life, and so I was really happy to share it with children. So we're going to start off by, I'd like to introduce you to my family. James, can you advance the slide? So this is obviously my birth my mom and my dad, and in the center there is my brother, my older brother, Jackie Jr. So Jackie was born in 1946 in November. So he was very much a part of that entire entry into baseball. And it really was very sort of a difficult entry for him because he was in the spotlight when I don't think he really wanted to be in this, when he was too young to really deal with it. Okay, moving next. So now this picture introduces my next brother, David. David is 2.5 years younger than I am. My brother David is here in New York with me right now with my mom and I. But David lives in Tanzania, East Africa. He grows coffee. He has a very large business and a cooperative of about 300 to 400 very small African farmers, and they pool their coffee and get some other coffee, and they because David's African American, he's able to send it to the United States, and they actually sell the coffee in the United States, and the farmers then can make a little bit more money than they would ever make if they were just selling to the cooperative, the government cooperative. So because of that, they've been able to do some real community development, which is quite wonderful. David is the father of 10 children. My brother Jackie had one child, Sonia, and then I had one child, Jesse. But so my brother single-handedly repopulated our family. So moving on. So I love this picture because it's important for kids. I want kids to understand my age or our ages when my father retired from baseball. So this is actually a shot that was taken when they announced his retirement. It was taken in his trophy room in our house in Stamford, Connecticut. And so you see my brother David. He doesn't like this picture, of course, because he's got a thumb in his mouth. I think it's kind of cute. And my brother Jackie and myself. So we were 7, 9 going on 10, and 4 going on 5. So my dad retired after 10 years with the Dodger organization. It was the Brooklyn Dodgers, and 1 year with the Montreal farm team. And he retired after the 1956 season and accepted a job with Chalk-Full of Nuts. So we're going to go into the next slide, please. Oh, no, before we get to his retirement, this next photograph is very important to me because this introduces my grandmother, Zelly, and that's my mom's mother. And she, if you remember from the book, grandmothers play such a critical role in our development. And Zelly was, extremely important to me when I was growing up. Moving on to the next one. So, best friend, Candy Allen. This is Candy and I. We just gotten our sort of matching or sister Madras dresses. And this is on one of our trips. I think it was to Florida because we were to see the palm trees in the back. So we used to come to Florida often or down to the warm part of the country in the wintertime, because it started when my dad was playing baseball. We would come as a family to spring training each year. We did not, back then, families did not travel with the ball players when they went on the road. But we did go to spring training in Florida because he was going to be gone for a long time, and they had housing for the family. Okay, moving on. The next slide is I like kids to see we were true teenagers in 1963. We just got the first 2-piece bathing suits, which we were a little nervous. So, and this is Candy and her sister Kimberly and her cousin. And Candy and Kim are my dearest friends, and we're very attached. Candy, the kids always ask me what happened to Candy. Candy became a writer. She's a writer, and she worked in films. And she mostly behind the camera work in film. And then she married a very famous conductor from London, from England. And she's lived in London, I guess, for 15 years or more. And we're still very, very close. Okay, moving on. She continues to write. classroom shot. You know, I like the kids to see, you know, how we dressed back there, how we wore our hair, the fact that we didn't, you know, did not have a real diverse junior high school. That Candy and I and one other, there are three blacks in my school in junior high school. It was Candy and I, and there was a boy, black boy. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So my dad retired in January 1957, before the 1957 baseball season. It was after the Dodgers, and my father was older, and it was time for him to retire. His body was not rebounding as it should. So he knew this and went ahead and started making plans for retirement when the Dodgers told him that they were trading him to the Giants. And the New York Giants was the team we hated most. So it was a real insult to be traded to your hated team when you'd given 10 years of, you know, playing for one team. But back then the players had no say. This is prior to having any rights in as players. The owners made all the decisions about where you were going next. So my dad, as the 1956 season ended, my father's reply to the manager when he told him he was being traded is, "I'll give it my best shot. You know, I'll do the best I can." Then he went right out and called his agent and said, "Okay, I want to accept the job with Chalk-Full of Nuts." So the job with Chalk-Full of Nuts was as a vice president of personnel. And the good thing about it is that, now we're entering 1957. And the good thing about it was my dad very much wanted to be involved in the civil rights movement that was really, you know, as you all know, heating up. So he built into his contract that he could do as much work as he wants with the civil rights movement. So he traveled that first year out of baseball across the country raising money for the NAACP. He was their spokesperson, and he raised over $1 million. It was a very successful campaign. So my father then, to the movement, became known as a fundraiser. Okay, moving to the next one. And a motivational speaker. So he became associated with Dr. King. In 1962, 5 years after my dad retired from Major League Baseball, he was elected into the Hall of Fame. And Dr. King called him and asked, told my father, congratulate him, but also saying he wanted to give a dinner in his honor in New York City. And from that point, they began working together for the next few years. So they actually had this big event, and then Dr. King brought him into his work in Albany, Georgia, coming to voter registration drives as a speaker, and then he got pulled into the bomb churches, and Dr. King asked him to lead the national effort to raise money for the bomb churches across the country. Because the day my dad arrived in Albany, Georgia, 2 churches were bombed, and they visited it in addition to doing the voter registration work. Okay, moving on to the next slide, please, James. So this slide, you know, doing your research, you know, there's all levels of research, and photo research is certainly one important level. So when we found this picture, just, you know, since I opened up my book with my dad being in the hospital, you know, this is my evidence. So you're always looking for evidence when you're writing. This is a memoir, and it reads sort of like a novel. So you want to make sure people understand that this is based on fact. Moving on, James. Thank you. So this, you know, my dad, when he would travel to these events, he always tried to get a current athlete to travel with him. So it was a lot of times it was the boxers, because, you know, they were more individual and not in a team sport and less controlled like that. So this is with him with Floyd Patterson when they came down to Birmingham together. Moving on. James.
It's there.
Can you see it? Okay, cool. Yeah. So they arrived in Birmingham this trip. My father had come to Birmingham a couple of times before. He came to speak at the SCLC conference in Birmingham. he came down to do some, speak in some churches, kind of motivational stuff. So this trip with Floyd Patterson was not their first trip, but it was after they had done some fundraising in New York City to get bail money for people that had been jailed during the marches. So they actually stayed at the A.G. Gaston Motel. This was the day after the motel was bombed, and he and Floyd are looking at the bomb site. Again, it helps to document, what you're talking about in your material. Next, James, please. And now I found lots of pictures of my dad on his speaking tours, and those were great for me to find. I always enjoy seeing him speaking and hearing him speak. But this one was down in Birmingham, and during the time he and Floyd were there. Okay, moving on. So the important thing, so this is what I carried with me from 1963 that was so monumental. One was March and sharing it with my family and learning more about racism and understanding the civil rights movement on a whole different level that year. And also beginning to find my own voice, not being afraid. We had talked, we were very comfortable talking about the movement or hearing about the movement at home, at the dinner table, but I wasn't comfortable speaking about it at school, in my school where I was the only Black kid. So this year was my beginning to feel better. So what was so critical this year that I always remembered was the conversation we had with my dad when he said, he found a way for us to be involved as a family in the civil rights movement. So it's not just him traveling south, it's, us doing this together. And he talked about what we have been doing in our own neighborhood and in our own school systems in Stamford, Connecticut, and talked, about segregation up there and how we were dealing with it. But he said that, and I hope you'll find work that you love and always keep God and family as a priority, but we're also going to have a family mission. And we're going to start functioning as a family around the civil rights movement by continuing the work he'd been doing in fundraising. So that was a discussion, and that happened before we actually go on the March on Washington. But we had been asking to go with him down south and to be part of the marches, and he did not make that happen. And he just kept saying, hang in there, we'll figure this out. And so this was our first actual march as a total family. And if you read the book, you know that we did get separated as a family because my dad was pulled aside with my brother David to greet the marchers when they were coming in. He was not on the stage. He was not an organization. He was an individual. So King just had him stand beside him as they were just starting out on the march and say, he's here with his family, and we're all gonna, do this march together. This is the only picture we have from that. So what we started doing as a family was having these series of jazz concerts that was most of my young and my childhood, or my teen years. We had jazz concerts on our lawn in Stamford, Connecticut. So this is actually one of the jazz concerts. And the cute little girl in the front with the white dress, it looks like a white dress, playing the flute is me. So I am playing with Herbie Hancock. Herbie Mann, and
that's so cool.
Cool, yeah. And then David, that's my brother David, next to me, hitting on the bongos.
Mm-hmm.
So we were not part of the concert, but we did have a little fun before we were kind of warming up. The next slide, please. So the fun part about we did these jazz concerts. We started off with the jazz concert for SCLC in June, following the Children's March, it was one of the ways we sent money back to Birmingham and through Dr. King. And then we had our second jazz concert in September, right after the March on Washington. And the first one, Dr. King wasn't able to come to, so he came to this, said, I want you to do another one, I'm definitely coming. So this is Dr. King and Roy Wilkins from the NAACP. Remember, I told you that my dad started off with the NAACP, and organizations started to get a little territorial. Oh, Mimi wants to join the group. So they get a little territorial, when they have a good fundraiser, they don't want to necessarily want him going off and raise money for everybody. So this particular concert raised money for Dr. King and for Roy Wilkins. Now, an important thing when I was writing the book, so I was telling the story, and Dale's story and Janice Nixon's story, and our time together were so helpful to me. I wanted to find a way to weave their stories into the book I'm writing. And it came towards the end of the book when my dad comes back from Birmingham, and he describes having met Janice's mother and Dale. And so that was the only piece that kind of played with, the ability to, bring a little fiction into it. So my dad did not actually meet Janice's mother, but Janice told me the story of her family, and it was so important to me because of the way that her mom organized the family and got the entire family to march and throughout, and to attend meetings and all. And so I wanted to show how families did this together, because that's kind of what our family was like. And Dale's story, Dale had told me that he'd met my dad, and when he was a little younger, and and he met him in the church, and he don't remember exact details. So I was just happy to be able to weave Dale in at that point as well, and through my father telling me what his trip to Birmingham was like. So at this jazz concert, the way my parents structured it, the children were our role was to sell hot dogs and sodas to make money, so that we also came up with our own pot of money. So in our first jazz concert, we actually turned in over $1,000, and it's fun to, once again to be able to. So much of my history is documented, so I could find a newspaper article that actually told us how much money the children made on selling hot dogs and sodas. But it gave us it made us feel a vital part of this day, and that we too contributed funds, and therefore contributed to the movement in a very personal way. And we brought all of our friends in our family, so it was and we did that. I'm telling you, we did that even when we were adults and we had our own children. So we continued to have jazz concerts. We every time there was a crisis in the movement, we would have a jazz concert and raise money for, whether it was Goodman Training or Serenity or whatever the family's needs were. They would pull together these jazz artists. Now, that was fabulous when my dad was alive, but we continued when my dad died in 1972. We continued to have jazz concerts, but we did them for the Jackie Robinson Foundation. So we actually didn't stop having jazz concerts until the late 80s. So we went from 1963 to the late 80s having jazz concerts at our home. But things changed. When my dad was alive and we were doing the civil rights movement, jazz artists came, and the greatest ones came and volunteered their time. As we moved into the next phase after my dad was deceased, and started doing it for the foundation. Then jazz artists started wanting to get paid, and the sound system all became more complex, and cost of staging became more complex. So we actually stopped doing them because we weren't able to really make money on them any longer. They were wonderful. Everyone still talks about these jazz concerts. You know, wonderful gatherings, wonderful music, just a great day. And my mother would always start the day by having us, singing praises. So she'd start off with the gospel so we could sing praises, so we'd have sunny days. And all those years, we never got rained out of a jazz concert. So we always called her the sun goddess. She is an amazing woman. She's now 97. Is very much still head of the family. And anytime we step a little bit past that and make it seem like we are taking over, she reminds us that she is the head of the family. So that's basically the story. The book has been really well received by children. That's what I had hoped. They love having discussions about the civil rights movement. They can't believe. Then they see a picture of my dad and Martin Luther King. That just thrills them. We talk a lot about finding voice, and that's been the work I've done for the past 25 years with a program I do with Major League Baseball. It's in schools all over the country. It's all work about having kids find their voice and develop self-esteem and be able to know that they can overcome obstacles in their life. So that's been a work I've done, and it just carries through in a lot of my writing. But I did it even before. I did it the nurse midwife, and I worked a lot with teenage girls that were pregnant, and my goal with them was to not just prepare them for their birth, but really to help them figure out what the next steps were in their life and how they're getting back to school and how are they going to manage and to do school. So again, it's about finding voice, and I've always equated voice with self-esteem. And it sort of goes back to my own early childhood where I lost my voice. I was very comfortable with voice at home, but had no confidence in school. And I had to sort of find my voice and get strong. And, but that took years, and it sort of started around this 1963 period. So that's why I sort of merged all of these things about how finding my own voice with encouraging children today to find their voice. And they love talking about, speaking up today, and athletes speaking up today. How do I feel about that? And the issues that, that they feel their own alienation today. And these are kids from all cultures. I just came back from, well, I didn't. It was actually in February. But I was down in the Rio Grande Valley, with kids that were 99% Mexican. And, voice is so important to them, and this whole alienation. So it's been just very special work, and being able to use this book to support kids today has been quite special for me. So James, we have one last slide just to show Dad and I
I'm sorry, Sharon. I couldn't click it
right
anymore, and I cut it off because I couldn't click it.
Don't worry about it then. Okay. I end the slide for the kids and for the purpose of this to show kids. My dad and I, years later, I was in college, and we were actually in Chicago at an Operation Push event, but it was just kind of showing how our activism continued. And my dad did activism with Jackie and I in particular.
I think
that's it. That's the
Rand is putting something up.
I like that. Thank you, Rand. Thank you.
That was a great picture.
Oh, thanks. Yes, really special to me.
Yeah.
We couldn't cut all those other people out, so we had to leave that man's head in and everything. But he still liked the picture.
That's the one, Dale.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll sort of open it up now to see what questions you have. Did you read the book? How did you feel about being included in it in some way and all of that?
And actually, Sharon, I'm sorry, this is Ann. I'm going to hop in for just a minute because several new people have joined.
Okay.
Ann Whitehouse, you're on mute, but if you can unmute yourself, just tell us where you are. You're still unmuted. There you go.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah.
Hi.
Are you in New York City today?
No, thank God. I'm upstate. I'm in upstate New York, and near Millerton, New York. Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
I
Good.
mean, are you in Connecticut, Sharon? How's your mother?
No, I'm
in
in
the
New York City.
Esplanade? I've been wondering.
how's what?
How's your mom? And is your mom in the Esplanade? I remember you told me she.
No. She's on 66th and 3rd, but she spent all the winter with me in Florida, which was wonderful. And then we both came up to New York City February because I had to do a little bit of work travel and needed to arrange for her to be home in her home and have help, get some help. But she's good. She's.
Are you both in New York City right now?
We are both in New York City right now, sheltered or not sheltered. I don't know what we are. We're not quarantined, but we're in her apartment. My brother's here too, so it's quite fun.
Are you doing okay? Are y'all doing okay?
Fine. We are fine. We're going to be fine.
Right.
Nothing's happening here. We're going to be healthy.
Good. And your mom too, good.
Let me just grab, I think Dr. Stone is on. Brian Stone, would you say hi, please?
Yeah, hello, I'm here.
Great.
Hi.
We'll be
Hi,
moving
Brian.
in a few minutes.
Hey, I attended several of the concerts at
Oh, is that
your
right?
parents'
cool.
property. Actually, was security in order to be up
Oh.
front so I could watch the girls.
Oh my God.
Amazing shows.
Oh,
And let's say
Appreciate
hi to Albert. Albert, you're there?
Yeah. Hello,
hi.
Tell us where you are.
Columbia, Tennessee.
Okay, so that's all the newcomers. For those of you who may not know, Sharon is one of us since she was with us at the 2018 retreat that we held, our organization held in Birmingham. So that's how she knows so many of you. So Sharon, I'll turn it back to you for questions.
I have a question, Sharon. I have quite a few questions, but one that stands out to me is that you mentioned several times in the book about that mean governor. And most of us think of him as that way or even worse. But I know you were on the same program with his daughter, Peggy, and I was wondering, how was that like?
It was very
sharing.
uncomfortable. I was very uncomfortable. I was not necessarily happy that I had agreed to do it. It was the South Carolina booksellers convention, and we were going to be in South Carolina, and it's fine. We had a really good moderator, but I think I guess for me she's very soft spoken, and gives a little bit of makes you feel like she's a little fragile, so you're not too hard. But the point I was trying to make to her is that if we're going to write about our families, we have to be able to be honest about the good and the bad. And so she was able to, in her mind, still sort of separate out him being a segregationist with him also being a racist. So she saw it as two separate things, and I said, "There's no way. The basis for segregation was racism. So you can't really."
That was different. I don't get
Huh?
it. I don't even understand how you could say those were separate.
Yeah, but for her, it was important in her mind to not have him be the total bad guy. So she had to, but it was. They had us. The moderator was good because she was somebody that does discussions on race.
Mm-hmm.
So she was really an excellent moderator. So it was an interesting experience.
I would imagine you all are talking about Strom Thurmond, right?
No, George
George
Wallace.
Wallace.
Yeah.
They didn't say which governor.
This is Alabama.
But she said South Carolina, so that's why I asked.
We were in South Carolina this is during the book tour. So we were on book tour.
Okay.
And she has Wallace's daughter, Peggy. Peggy has a book out where she basically talks about her own change of heart around racism and segregation. And but in some way still has to sort of justify some of her father's behavior. One second. Mimi, sit down. Sit.
Let me just ask, I think somebody else was joined by telephone. Who's
My
that?
dog.
That's her dog.
No, but I think I see another phone number.
I'm
We
sorry.
saw that dog in Birmingham.
You
We
did
had our
see
dog
that
in Birmingham.
dog.
Right, he did. He was really
Hello,
Who is that, please?
this is Janice.
Well,
Jan
Jen,
Nixon.
Hi.
you know, I was so blessed because Birmingham was my first stop on the actual book tour, and Janice was available. It was after she had a little surgery, so you know we were both a little worried that she may not be able to come out, but she was able to. She and her daughter met me at the school, and that was a cool experience, wasn't it, Janice?
Right, right.
So
And it was wonderful. It was a very nice meeting. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
yeah, no, the kids were, and it was a school that was totally integrated. So you know, Janice and I were kind of making sure the kids understood that this wasn't always possible, you know. So, you know, it gave you a little hope that, you know, some things have changed. And at the same time, we wanted them to understand that it was a process that brought them to be in the school together and not, you know, not be separated because of color.
I have a question.
Yes, Mike.
If I heard you correctly, I think you spent time at spring training.
Yes.
When your dad was at spring training, the whole family was down. Well,
Correct.
that was in the 40s, 50s. What kind of level of racism did you have to face traveling with the team and living in that situation away from your normal home?
Well, what happened by the time we went down to Florida? Remember, well, when initially when Branch Rickey integrated the Dodgers and in the farm leagues, so he did it in a very specific way. For example, the first spring training they were in Cuba, and the thought was, you know, Cuba is very big into baseball. They play integrated teams. No big deal. They won't have any problems fielding his team as opposed to being in Florida where there would be conflict.
Right.
And yet, they brought their major league team and several of their minor league teams all came down at the same time for spring training in Cuba, and they housed the major league team in that big hotel and down in Havana. They sat on the hill. It was a big fancy hotel. So the major league team stayed there. The minor league team stayed at the newly constructed was an army base, and they had all the facilities for them. They had a cafeteria and everything, and they housed my father and Don Newcomb and Roy Campanella in a motel in downtown Havana where they didn't have a restaurant and they had to just eat out in the streets wherever they could find their food. So it was no controlled diet for them. They were not allowed to go to the hotel where the rest of the major league team was. And when they asked them about it, they said, well, it wasn't the Cubans that, would mind. It was the Americans who were staying in the fancy hotel. So, so his intentions were good, but the execution was again wrong. So what ended up happening was the Dodgers built Dodgertown in Vero Beach. Yeah.
Right.
So that from that point on, they housed the Dodger teams at Vero Beach. So that's sort of like an isolated community, and it was just for the Dodgers and Dodgers families. So I remember us traveling in the South or traveling where we had to stay in hotels just where Black people stayed in.
Green Book.
Huh?
The Green Book.
Yeah, the Green Book. So I remember that. I have memories of those days, but it didn't happen once the Dodgers built Dodger Stadium. Built Vero Beach.
Got it. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Well, I'll ask Sharon a question. If a school or some group wanted to have you come and speak, how does that get arranged?
Well, it gets arranged through Scholastic. They handle all the book related speaking things. I just am not doing anymore. I did a very extensive book tour, but now my mom lives with me most of the time, and so I have to be very selective about what travel I accept, because then that means I have to find, make sure she's covered and she's really not comfortable.
There are no schools in session now anyway.
And no schools in session. Yeah, I did. So I kind of just do individual case, but I have a website on the back and it has all those contact informations. So my website is Sharon Robinson Inc. INK.
Great, thank you.
Sharon, I'd just like to just make a comment. If I may, is it okay?
Yes.
Okay. Look, thoroughly enjoyed the book. As a matter of fact, when I started reading it, I posted the book on Facebook, and several of my friends saw it and purchased copies for their kids, and I've since heard from them, and they enjoyed it as well. But one of the fun things that I did was, there's a historic library in Birmingham. It was the only library that Black people could go to, Smithfield Library, right at the corner of Center Street, Dynamite Hill, and 8th Avenue. And I purchased several other copies, but I sent one to the Smithfield Library in particular, because that was the one that I used as a child growing up in Birmingham.
Oh,
that's
And
great.
they build a house well.
Thank you for that. That's so cool.
Hey, Sharon, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
Actually, I watched the Netflix documentary on your dad and your family, and it actually talks about the concerts that would be on your line. But it was pretty extensive. It covered, from him going into actually meeting your mother at UCLA when he was at UCLA until his death. What did you think of the documentary?
So is that the one Ken Burns?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's on PBS.
It was PBS that it was on?
Yeah,
Okay.
PBS. PBS. Yeah, I thought he did an incredible job. And, I loved, he clarified things, that needed to be clarified, such as the myth about Pee Wee Reese and putting his arm around my dad. And, I thought that was, a really important, because no one, there was no memory of it from my father or Pee Wee. They blew it off and people, but they got made into this big thing. And, Ken Burns and Sarah Burns and her husband, they just did incredible research. And they found out things, that documented things that we didn't have documentation of. And I also, you questioned it because if it had happened, the newspapers would have covered it, and there was no newspaper coverage of that moment. So what was true about them was that they were really great partners in baseball, and they were friends. And they were, Pee Wee was shortstop, my dad was second base, so they had this great double team thing. So the theory that they were friends, the fact that they were friends is factual, but not that, it was, Pee Wee stepping out and putting his arm around my dad in the midst of a booing, the truth. So I thought he did a great job. I loved how he, from, kind of beginning to end. A lot of people don't know about my dad's civil rights career or work in the civil rights movement. They know only about, the baseball part of it. And I showed you the picture earlier of how old David and Jack were when my dad retired from baseball, because that's really the person we knew more than we knew him as a baseball player. So when he was a baseball player, he was away from us and we were so young. But what he brought home, what his energy brought into the house, was the importance of this social change and, and how important it was for us to be, all of us to participate in it. It didn't matter. And segregation was in the North as it was in the South. It wasn't different kinds of segregation, and had different kinds of impacts on people. So racism did. So he wanted, us to understand that more. That he didn't ever talk about, he wasn't one to brag about his baseball career. It was more important that he talk about the movement as it was unfolding and the role that children were playing in change, making change happen.
Yeah, and actually, I think you can see it on Netflix. I think it is on.
Oh,
Netflix.
it's on Netflix now. It might be. Yeah. Okay.
It was a PBS special, is what it was.
Okay, but they're showing it on Netflix now.
I'm checking now in case somebody else wants to see it. I'm almost certain that I saw it on Netflix. If not, it's on a streaming service. I know that.
It is on streaming service because I certainly have seen it on the airplanes. So yeah. You're right. It was initially a PBS. He does. Ken Burns does. Works with PBS.
Yeah.
But I'm sure they share.
I have a question.
I have a comment. Go ahead.
Should I? Oh, wait, Janice, you want to go first and then me?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, Sharon, thank you so much for inviting me to your book signing, and I just want the group to know that how successful it was, how engaged the children were, and it was amazed. I was amazed that these children weren't just buying just one book or two books. They bought every copy that Sharon had. So the line was yay long. I thought we would never ever leave, but they were so enthused. And once you start reading this book, you really can't put it down.
Oh,
and I've been promoting the book, and I am just so excited, and I'm just so glad to be a part. And this is where kids is so important because it keeps you in contact. It keeps you in contact with each other. You develop a relationship. A couple of weeks ago, we had guys from LA to come, and Sharon, I talked about that book. So they're going to do this. Yeah, they're going to do this series on the civil rights, and they want to keep in touch with me. So it's just great. And we're supposed to have the Jackie Robinson Day on the 8th. So I think it's the 17th. I don't know if it's going to be canceled or not, but it's scheduled for 11 to 3. Jackie Robinson Day.
April. Yeah.
Pardon me?
In April?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I'm glad you reminded me, Janice, actually, because I think I owe that lady something.
Okay.
We don't know what's going to happen by April. Let's hope everything's back to normal, but I don't know.
Just hope and pray.
Yeah. I have a question, Sharon, if I can ask you.
Yeah, I can't. So how do I get down to see the other faces? I don't know how to do that.
Are you on gallery view?
I'm on gallery, so I see two.
Oh, maybe there's an arrow.
Oh, yeah.
Or put it on speaker view, and then when Ann speaks, you'll see her.
Oh, okay. Can I ask a question right now?
Yes, go ahead.
I see it now. So Sharon, I was so fascinated about what you said when you started to do the research for your book, that so much of your history was documented. And so you could actually find out the facts. And I thought, wow, that's really, to grow up in the shadow of celebrity like you did is a strange kind of mixture of putting together a private life and a public life. Most of us don't experience at all. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how that's affected you as a person and as a writer.
Okay.
I just found that very interesting.
Okay. Yeah. Luckily as a child, my father and mother were so focused on us having a private life that as part of why they moved us up to the suburbs in Connecticut. Oh gosh, I want to go. I don't see anybody's voice. Okay, so hold on. Back together. Okay, we see spaces. So they were very focused on making sure that we had a private life, but we also had a public life. And so we learned very early that you have both. So when we're in public, we have to. People are just going to interrupt our dinner. It's just part of life. And you might go to the airport and they may say, "Oh, Mr. Robinson, I'm going to bump you all up to first." But my mother, they'd always say to us that just do not get used to any of this. So you kind of, right from the beginning, you just kind of learned as a public and a private. Now, they moved us to this Connecticut, so for land, so they could have the privacy, so that we could, when we're home, we really could be private. Because like when we were in Queens, our house was right on the street, on a corner, so people could just drive up and park right in your practically driveway, you know what I mean? But once we moved to Connecticut, we did have the privacy.
So they protected you.
They protected us in that way. But when we're out, we had to be public. And it was just, it's always been part of our life. I prefer my privacy. So I don't, I love going out on the road, and I love, meeting people, and I love seeing kids, and I just can't wait to get home and just walk my dog. Just have as normal and private a life. And that's, my dad was like that. I'm not a social person like that. I don't hang out. I don't go to parties. I go out to dinner, but I like my privacy. And, as a teenager, I struggled, not because it can be misinterpreted. I was just trying to figure out who I was, like all teenagers have to do. And that was probably the hardest time for my brothers and I, is getting through that adolescence and getting through it safely, without too much damage, because we had to sort of break away from our parents and figure out who we were. And for each of us did it differently. And I don't know that, we were great at it, but, we did the best we could, and we came out. If we survived, which my older brother did not, but if we survived, my brother David and I have had a life that has been very fulfilling, and it's based on these concepts we got from home in 1963 with our parents, about the importance of, reaching other people and changing lives and caring about people and caring about the world around us and wanting to explore and bring people in. So I'm not, even though I like my privacy, I have, had some extraordinary work. And I'm very happy about that, because it makes me feel fuller as a person, satisfied in my life.
Thanks a whole lot, Sharon. We're happy to have you here with us too.
Okay.
You're
Thank
a pleasure.
you,
And every time I see you, I get uplifted just knowing you and your family still exist.
Thank you.
And doing a great job too.
Thank you all.
Yeah,
Thank
we
you,
have
Sharon.
a second speaker too. Cecil, could
Yes.
you introduce him?
I have no problem introducing. He's my little brother. So Dr. Brian Stone, grew up with me in Birmingham. We actually, the same street. He grew up 2 doors over from my aunt, who just recently passed away, on 11th Avenue. And Doc has been, a resident physician for a number of years now. He worked in New York. He's a urologist, worked at Harlem Hospital, at Columbia Hospital, and now maintains a urology clinic in Jasper, Alabama. So with no further ado, Dr. Brian Stone.
Hey, thank you. And I want to express my appreciation to the Robinson family. My daughter is a Jackie Robinson Foundation scholar.
Oh my God!
And through their generosity, she was able to attend George Washington University, which is $66,000 a year, was out of my budget. She's a mechanical engineer working for Belkin and an artist. And I think you guys had a celebration at a Dodgers game. Her name is Elise Stone.
Oh.
And
yes.
Yeah, she's in LA.
Okay.
Yep. So.
Cool.
So I just want to say thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
So my journey is in Titusville, like Cecil said. And from there, I got a scholarship to Rutgers University, which took me to the East Coast. And I attended medical school at Morehouse School of Medicine, graduated from UAB, and my residency in surgery took me to the Bronx, New York, to Montefiore Medical Center and Albert Einstein College of Medicine. From there, after my training, I was recruited to Columbia, where I was an associate professor, and I had tenure at St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital, Harlem, Maimonides Hospital in Brooklyn, and so I kind of worked all over the place. My experience with the disaster of 9/11 and actually being in Rockefeller Center during the anthrax attack, and a paper that I wrote during while I was at Rutgers on biological warfare kind of made me the resident pseudo expert on kind of what's going on now. I'm not an expert at it. I just read a lot. I've been part of the planning group for the virus with Brookwood Baptist Health Systems. What I will say is you have to be very careful about the information that's on the internet. There's a whole lot of inaccurate information. The COVID-19 virus or coronavirus is in the family of the common cold. This is a variant that the human population hasn't seen, so we have no immunity. And a lot of people think it's not a big deal, but the concern is the capacity of the healthcare system in America. It's built on a very thin line, just for day-to-day type health situations, and it really has no capacity to rapidly expand to accept a lot of new patients, especially with pulmonary type of disease like the COVID virus causes. Currently, we have about 62,000 ventilators in the entire country, and most of them are being used, and we only have about 10,000 in reserve. So if the numbers hold correctly and you see a moderate situation where 10% of the population is affected, I mean, you're talking a country of 350 million people. So potentially you could see 20 to 30 million affected, and say you have 1 to 2% severely ill, you're talking about, 2 million. I mean, so everybody's very afraid. I mean, because if it follows like what's occurring in Italy, the disease kicks in within 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks, you're going to see a doubling of the number of people who are very ill that require respiratory support on a ventilator. So as an example, in the New York metropolitan area, our concern after 9/11 was that you only had, of all the hospitals around, you had maybe 500 to 600 ventilators. And if you had a mass casualty situation, there was absolutely no way the system could accommodate. So nationwide, if we start to see a significant doubling, even with all the bluster from the White House, the country is not prepared. And so we've had meetings and we're talking it through, but there's really minimal capacity for the system to accommodate. So the only thing we can do now is try to separate people from people to slow down the spread, so that as people get sick, it happens at a slow rate that allows the system to be able to catch up. But I think just looking at the numbers, I just don't see how. Right now, I mean, just yesterday, Italy had 500 people die.
Wow.
They're storing coffins in churches. The crematoriums are running 24 hours a day. And the only reason China was able to stop it is because they're basically a police state. So they made everybody stay home. They delivered meals. They separated the sick, put the families of the sick in hotels, and they kept everybody separate for almost 2 months. And so that was able to slow down the infection. But in our society, that's not possible. So anybody that has questions, I'm open. But I get updates every day. I mean, we got shortages of gloves. We're not having enough gloves. We don't have enough masks. We don't have enough, they call it PPE, which is personal protective wear. And anytime you contact a patient, you got to use gloves, a mask, and face goggles, and you got to throw it away. And the majority of the excess has been pretty much used by, between the infections in China, Iran, and Italy. So we're playing catch up. And the only way that this will happen in the proper way is that they're going to demobilize the country like they did during World War II and get companies that make other things to make what we need. So,
Doctor, this is Janice. I have a question. I think it's some confusion.
Yeah, go ahead.
People are saying that it's airborne, and then people saying it's not airborne. I'm a nurse from Brookwood.
So it's not floating in the air, but if you're near somebody who has it, they're coughing, or they sneeze, it becomes airborne in the droplets within 6 feet. If it lands on a surface, it can live on that surface. I've heard varying reports, but several hours.
That was my understanding. But I just had a conversation with somebody saying, "Oh, it's just airborne." It's like, no, you can get it from the surface. Right,
you can get it from the surface. You got to wash your hands. I think we're kind of at the point now. I keep gloves in my car. Gloves are hard to find, but when I pump gas, I never touch things. If you're in the store, wear gloves. Don't touch things. Elevators, don't touch the buttons with your hands. Doorknobs, rails on stairs, you need to have some gloves. Even if you got to buy gloves that you can rewash, because the rubber gloves are in shortage right now.
So you can wash them?
I would say cotton gloves. If it comes down to you not having any gloves, I mean, they make cotton gloves, wool gloves or whatever.
Okay.
And I have this desire that I want to help, but I'm a nurse. I've been a nurse for 20-some years, but I have sarcoidosis. So
you can't.
I'm gonna stay awake. Right.
Yeah, I'm in the hospital every day. I got no choice. It's occupational hazard. But the concern we also have is that if the healthcare workers start getting sick, and we got a shortage of doctors already.
Right.
That's kind of what happened in Italy. About 10% of their healthcare workforce got sick.
And let me say this, I'm a former restaurant worker, and one of the things that we always talked about was cross contamination. I explained to people, once you use the glove, you got to discard them. You can't keep using the same glove, or the rubber gloves. You can't keep using them. You got to dispose of them.
Nope. You got to dispose of them.
Is it true?
Stay away from people. Go ahead.
Oh, is it true that most of the people, all of the people who have died, have been between 50 and 90? And I was wondering why the kids are not taking it serious.
All right. So the data that came out of Italy today was that 46% of their cases were between the age of 20 and 54. Wow. So it's not true that young people don't get it. Their mortality rate is less, but this particular disease scars the lungs, so they end up with pulmonary scarring of the lungs, kind of like COPD. Mm-hmm. So I recently had a battle with 3 of our 20-year-olds. We had 1 that went to London for spring break, 2 that went to LA, and they argued us down that you can't be afraid, etc. But a lot of people just don't understand. So, but it's serious what's coming. But there's not.
Doctor, I have another question. This is Janice, and I'm sorry, but I need to ask you this because my husband has 2 forms of cancer. He has pleural effusion right now. So I'm trying to tell him that it's important. I mean, I think that we shouldn't even be in too close a contact. I mean, I have Sjogren's and sarcoidosis, and he has multiple myeloma and prostate.
Yeah, the problem is the test. If we were able to do mass testing to identify who has, that would make it easier. Because then you could separate, where it was, and that's our biggest issue right now. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't touch it, and if you don't have the test that tells you whether a person is positive or negative, you're not going to know.
So could pleural effusion, could that be, some type of relation?
If he doesn't have a fever and associated with his symptoms, it's unlikely. But and right now, because they don't have enough tests, if you don't fit the criteria of fever, cough, and sore throats, you're not going to get tested because they don't have enough tests. Trump keeps saying anybody that wants a test can be tested. That's a lie. They don't have enough tests.
It's not true.
And for those of us with underlying conditions like you, Janice, and your husband, I'm a diabetic.
Yeah.
I would suggest that your husband doesn't go out and that.
No, he should stay. I would literally shelter in place.
Yeah.
If you find some young people to run errands for you, or do drives.
That's just with him. He has not stayed in one day. He will not stay in. So I kind of isolate myself away from him.
I'd be happy to talk to him.
I have a question. Once you have it, can you get it again, or are you immune?
Yep. No. They've been seeing some people that have it recur.
So you're not immune once you have it. You can get it again.
Not necessarily, because they had cases in the Chinese group that got a recurrence. Like it cleared up, they thought they were asymptomatic, and it came back. Normally, you should get some immunity, but we still don't have enough information. I mean, they're still gathering data and hoping that over time we'll get what they call herd immunity. It occurs with other types of infections. But right now, they just don't have enough information. We're getting updates every day.
And is it true that that it takes 2 weeks from being exposed for you to come down to being sick?
Yeah, 10 to 14 days.
Yeah, one of the.
So I read an article today that said an additional problem might be that it's evolved into 2 different strains. Could you comment on that?
That's always possible. Yep, that's always possible with a virus. But this particular one is still moving. Now, it's possible it's evolved through Italy and time, but I mean, it's still only been around, I'd say, for the last 6 to 8 months,
One
I
of
knew
the
about
doctors
it in
from the
December.
FDA was saying something today, Brian, about the blood supply and the possibility of using the blood of those people who've had the disease and are no longer affected, that they might be able to use that blood to treat those with the disease. Is that possible?
That takes a while. Yeah, it's possible, but it takes a while. It took us a couple of years to come up with a stable vaccine for the influenza virus.
Okay.
You're talking 18 months to be. I mean, they're going to start testing stuff, and they're trying to keep the message positive in the public eye. But just in my experience in the development of new drugs and just figuring out if it's toxic, figuring out allergic reactions, figuring out if it's effective, it takes a while. But they're going to be experimenting and trying different things. But I wouldn't place all my hopes on a vaccine. That they need to pour all their money into making ventilators and protective wear. By time, while things are being developed.
And how long does it take from when you have the test to when you get the result back?
Depending on who makes it. One is the 4-hour test is not readily available. The Quest and LabCorp tests take a few days. I'm hoping that they're going to mass produce, because we've had a couple of patients recently at our hospital, and it takes a few days, we finally got one positive that we know of in Walker, but they're not doing enough tests. They've done 1,000 tests in a state of 3 million people.
Yeah.
So, doctor, how would I get in touch with you if I need you to talk to my husband? Because even though I'm a nurse, they don't want to listen to me. So,
His
how would I get in touch with you?
His number's on the screen.
Okay.
You can.
Oh yeah, just call my cell phone.
Right.
205-910-3595, and I'm happy to share what I know with anybody.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Janice, this is
Yeah,
Ann. I'll give you his number.
Okay.
Yeah, you all say my number. And I give you my office number. 205-384-3013. I'm in surgery a lot, but I'll always call you back.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Yeah, these are difficult times, but we'll get through it. It can't rain forever.
It's true. We've
No,
been
it's
waiting a long time in Alabama.
True. True. True.
We've also asked
Who could have expected?
We've also asked Dr. Stone to speak with us next month too. So we don't want to hold this session too long unless anybody have a last minute pressing question.
Well, Dr. Stone, this is Dale. Welcome to Kids in Birmingham. It's been a somewhat
it's a pleasure
to listen to you today. We appreciate your sharing your resources and your knowledge with us, and we look forward to you participating on an ongoing system with Kids in Birmingham. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Just to let you know, Brian, Dale was in Phi Alpha.
Oh my goodness. So was I. Awesome. All right, everybody. I gotta go.
Doctor.
All right, Doctor.
Thank you.
See you later.
Well,
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Sharon.
Thank you.
Hanging in there.
Bye.
And, Sharon,
Bye.
Thanks,
Sharon.
Thank you.
Sharon.
Thanks, Sharon. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Sharon.
all you guys stay safe now.
Yeah.
Okay,
Stay
everybody
healthy.
stay healthy.
Yes.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.